The 41st floor of the Signal Sol was quieter than any floor beneath it, and at 6:47 p.m. on the 14th of December, only one object in the entire penthouse suite mattered, though the man standing 11 paces away from it did not yet know this. The object was a slim navy envelope, unmarked, resting on the marble console beside a crystal decanter of 40-year Ballantines. It had been placed there 91 minutes earlier by a courier in a black wool overcoat who had signed nothing, taken nothing, and left through the service elevator without meeting the concierge's eye. The envelope contained one item, a single ticket embossed in gold. But Kang Min-jae had not opened it. He had not even looked at it directly. He had walked past it twice on his way to the window that faced the Han River, and each time his own reflection, ghosted against the glass and the black water below, had seemed slightly older than he remembered. He was drinking soju, not the Ballantines. He preferred the smaller glass. His grandmother had once told him that whiskey was for men who wanted to forget, and soju was for men who wanted to remember, and Min-jae, at 41, had decided some years ago that he no longer wished to forget anything. The suite smelled faintly of white lilies from the flower arrangement his fiancée had ordered that afternoon, and beneath it, more faintly, of the leather of a briefcase he had not yet opened. Outside, snow had begun to fall over Yongsan, slow and undecided, catching on the street lamps along Eichhorn Row and dissolving against the glass 12 inches from his face. He thought, unbidden, of his Aomioni, not of her voice, which he had lost years ago, but of her hands, the way she had once shelled chestnuts on a low wooden table in Andong, methodically, without hurry, saying nothing while she waited for him to admit that he had lied about where he had been the night before. She had known. She had always known. And she had waited always for him to arrive at the truth on his own, as though the truth were a guest for whom the room had already been prepared. The World Cup final would begin in Doha in 4 hours and 11 minutes. He would be in the VIP executive box at Lusail Stadium with his fiancée, Han Ye-rin, whose family owned 23% of a shipping conglomerate and whose father had personally negotiated the terms of Min-jae's engagement over 3 separate dinners at the Shilla. Ye-rin's emerald green couture gown was already laid out in the adjoining bedroom. The private jet was fueled. The motorcade in Doha had been coordinated by 3 separate security firms. The envelope on the console had come from none of them. Min-jae finished the soju. He set the glass down on the marble and watched the small, pale circle it left on the black stone. He did not yet walk to the envelope. There was time. There was, he believed, always time. On paper, Kang Min-jae was one of the most successful men in Korea. He was 41 years old, the sole director of Daehan Holdings, LLC, a legally registered investment company incorporated in Yeoksam-dong, whose portfolio included 2 boutique hotels in Jeju, a private wealth management arm in Singapore, 4 shipping subcontractors in Busan, and a majority stake in a media production house in Sangam-dong that had produced 3 award-winning dramas in the last 5 years. He owned a hanok in Bukchon that had once belonged to a minor Joseon-era scholar, a duplex apartment in Hanam-dong overlooking Namsan, and a small farmhouse in Yangpyeong where he had not slept in 7 years. He drove a black Bentley flying spur that his driver, Yoon Tae-hyun, kept immaculate. He wore suits from a tailor on Dosendero who had made his first suit when he was 26 years old, and the tailor still charged him the same price he had charged in the first year, because Min-jae had once quietly paid the man's daughter's tuition at Doha and never mentioned it again. 3 years earlier, he had divorced his first wife, Adaeze Kang, born Adaeze Okonkwo in Enugu, Nigeria, a woman he had met in Lagos when he was 34 and she was 29, when the world he then inhabited had felt to him like a corridor of doors that opened only in one direction. 6 months ago, he had announced his engagement to Han Ye-rin, who was 28, who had studied art history at the Court Hall in London, and whose father's signature on a memorandum of understanding would open ports to Daehan Holdings that had been closed to men like Min Jae for 3 decades. The engagement had been announced at a garden party in Pyeongchang-dong, attended by 2 former ministers and 1 sitting justice of the Constitutional Court. The wedding was set for the following May. He had signed the memorandum of understanding at 3:14 p.m. that same afternoon. His fountain pen had been a gift from his late father, on paper. There had been 3 warnings, and his Aomioni had delivered them all before she died, though he had not recognized any of them as warnings at the time. The first had been at Ajesa, the winter after his father's death, when his mother had set the memorial table herself and had placed the pair at the front, on the left side, not the right, and had said nothing when Min Jae quietly moved it. She had only looked at him once, across the low table, in the half-light of the candles, and had bowed her head to the floor a moment longer than he had. He had thought her grief was the reason. He had been wrong. The second warning had been at a lunch of doenjang jjigae in the kitchen of the Andong house, 3 years before her death, when she had said, without preamble, setting down her spoon, "A man who chooses his second wife before he understands his first has chosen no one." She had said it in Korean, plainly, in the register she used for household accounts, and she had not looked up from her bowl. He had laughed. She had not. The third warning had been at the gate of the Andong house on the last afternoon he ever saw her alive. She had walked him to the wooden gate, one hand on the beam, and she had looked past him toward the persimmon tree in the courtyard, whose fruit that year had refused to redden, and she had said quietly, "The woman you sent away was carrying more than a child. Remember that, Min Jae. She was carrying you." He had thought at the time that his mother had grown confused. That was the first quotable line, though he did not recognize it as such until many months later. He had been wrong. He did not yet know how wrong. At 7:16 p.m., the phone on the console vibrated once. It was a burner, one he did not remember activating, but which he recognized because it had lived in the false bottom of his desk drawer at the Yeoksamdong office for 6 years, waiting for a message that had never come, until now. The message was one line. Lusail Stadium, VIP Executive Box, Seat 4A. She will be in Seat 4B. The envelope on the console is yours. Open it. The number the message had come from was a Singaporean prepaid line, purchased on the 9th of November at a 7-Eleven on Orchard Road with cash. A $200 note and change, according to the security camera footage that would later become part of Court Order 2025-Hyung-Sang-1147. The camera in the store had recorded 58 seconds of the buyer, a woman in a wide-brimmed hat whose face never fully lifted toward the lens. The prepaid line had been activated once, used for this single message, and destroyed at 7:19 p.m., 3 minutes after the message was sent. Min Jae read the message twice. He set the phone down. He walked to the console. He opened the Ballantines, not the soju this time, and poured himself exactly 1 finger, no more, and drank it, standing, watching the snow. He then made 1 phone call to his driver, Tae-hyun, telling him to have the car ready in 41 minutes. He did not tell him where they were going. Tae-hyun did not ask. Min Jae then opened the envelope. The ticket inside was a second VIP Executive Box Pass for Lusail Stadium, Seat 4B. Seat 4A was already his. He did not know who seat 4B had been intended for, only that someone, somewhere, had purchased both seats and had chosen to send him one. He slid the ticket into the inner pocket of his overcoat, beside the ticket he already carried, and he waited for his fiancée to finish dressing. They landed in Doha at 11:47 p.m., local time on the 15th of December. The motorcade moved through the illuminated boulevards toward Lusail Stadium in a silence Min Jae had not planned, and Ye Rin, sensing something she could not name, held his hand more tightly than she usually did. Her emerald gown caught the light of the street lamps in green pulses. Her diamonds were her mother's. She had told him, that morning in Seoul, that she wanted to be photographed in profile from the left, because she believed her left profile was the more forgiving one. He had told her she was beautiful from every angle. He had meant it. They entered the VIP entrance at 3:34 a.m. Doha time, in the pre-dawn dark before the final. Cameras flashed. A FIFA protocol officer bowed. A Qatari prince nodded from 12 paces away. Ye Rin's smile was the smile of a woman who had trained for this moment since she was 17 years old. Then the officers of the executive suite, 3 of them in dark navy jackets, greeted Min Jae by name, briefly, and turned. They walked past him, toward the front row of the VIP box, toward a woman who was already seated there. She wore a sapphire blue suit, tailored with the precision of a Savile Row cutter, but softer in the shoulder, the way Milanese houses cut for women who do not need to armor themselves. Her earrings were small diamonds, older than she was. They had belonged to her grandmother, Adenaya Okonkwo of Enugu, who had worn them at the independence celebrations of 1960, and had given them to her granddaughter on the morning of her 30th birthday, with the words, "Wear these when you know who you are." Her hair was cropped shorter than Min Jae remembered, silvered at the temples in a way she had not bothered to dye. In her right hand, she held a slim leather folio. She had lost weight since the divorce, not from grief, though there had been grief, but from 3 years of eating what refugees ate in the camps where she had worked in Cox's Bazar, in Goma, in the mountains outside Erbil. She had, in the intervening years, learned to sleep on floors. She had learned to walk without a security detail. She had learned, in Igbo, to say the word for peace, Udo, with a precision she had never possessed as a young woman in Lagos. Adaize Kang, born Adaize Nkechi Okonkwo, 41 years old, holder of a master's in forensic accounting from the London School of Economics and a diploma in international humanitarian law from the Geneva Academy, global ambassador for Children Without Borders, turned in her seat and looked directly at the man who had once been her husband. She said quietly, in Korean, "Anja, Min Jae-si, sit down." He sat. If you are already feeling this, if the air in your own room has shifted somehow, if you are leaning slightly forward without having decided to, pause, take one slow breath, and hit subscribe to Midnight Love Saga. Tap the bell so the next chapter finds you the moment it drops. What is about to happen in the next 41 minutes will rearrange your understanding of who owes what to whom in 5 places, and it will rebuild that understanding with something quieter, stranger, and far more human than what you walked in with. Stay. You are going to want to be in the room for what comes next. And when this chapter closes, tell me one thing in the comments. What would you have done in that seat when she said, "Sit down"? Just that. Nothing more. To understand what happened in that box, you have to go back 12 years and 4 months to a city that no longer exists in either of their memories the way it actually was. Lagos in the wet season of the year. Min Jae turned 29 and Adaize turned 24 when Victoria Island was still cheaper than it would soon become, and the causeway to Lekki flooded twice a week and the generators of the Eco Hotel groaned all night against the outages. He had gone to Lagos for a shipping deal that had nothing, on the surface, to do with him. His young nim at the time, a man named Choi Sang-hoon, had sent him to observe a container arrangement at Tin Can Island port that would later prove to be the first in a chain of transactions the Korean National Tax Service would trace, without ever quite naming Min Jae, for the next 15 years. Min Jae had been the youngest man in the room. He had, at that stage of his life, believed that observing was the same as being innocent. He had met Adaz at a rooftop bar on Kofo Abayomi Street, where the wind came off the lagoon and the ice in the drinks melted before the second sip. She had been arguing with a British auditor about a discrepancy in a manifest. She had been correct. The auditor had been condescending. Min Jae had watched her, from 3 tables away, dismantle the man's argument in 9 sentences, and then finish her drink without triumph, as though the conversation had cost her something she did not intend to show. When she had passed his table on the way out, he had said in English, without standing, "Please." One question. She had stopped. She had waited. That was how it had begun, not with a smile, with a question. They had married 18 months later at a small ceremony in Enugu, at the Okonkwo family compound, where her grandmother had wept once, briefly, and had then taken Min Jae's hand and had said in Igbo, translated for him by Adaezi's youngest brother, "You have taken from us the one who was not for taking. Do not forget this." He had bowed. He had not forgotten, not entirely. They had lived in Seoul afterwards, in a small apartment in Itaewon, that Adaez had chosen because the walk to the mosque was pleasant, and the walk to Namsan was pleasanter. She had learned Korean with a fluency that startled even his mother. She had cooked jollof beside her mother-in-law's doenjang jjigae on Sundays, and his aomeoni had, in the way of Andong women, said nothing while eating, and had then asked for a second bowl. That second bowl, Adaezi had told him years later, had meant more to her than every wedding gift they received. They had a daughter. Her name in Korean was Ha-un, meaning grace and kindness. Her name in Igbo was Chidiogo, meaning God is good. She was born on the 3rd of April at Severance Hospital in the 14th floor delivery suite at 4:12 a.m., weighing 3.1 kilograms, with her mother's mouth and her father's silence. She died of an undiagnosed cardiac malformation at 17 months at Assen Medical Center on the 2nd of September, at 11:47 in the morning, under the care of a pediatric cardiologist named Dr. Seo, whose voice would remain, for both of them, the voice of the worst hour of their lives. There is nothing more to say about that morning. There was nothing more that anyone said about it, in any language, for a very long time. After Hae-yun Chidiogo, they had not divorced immediately. They had lived for 2 years in a house where certain rooms were not entered. Adaezi had asked once to volunteer with a small organization that built schools in northern Nigeria. He had said it was impossible. He had said the security situation was too dangerous, that his enemies could reach her, that she was needed at home. He had not said then that he could not bear the thought of her leaving. He had said instead that her dream of helping displaced children was an impossibility. Spoken in the register a man uses when he has already decided the conversation is closed. He had told her, in a kitchen in Hanam-dong at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, that some dreams were meant to remain dreams. She had set down the wooden spoon she was holding. She had said nothing. She had turned back to the stove. The divorce had come the following spring. He had not fought it. He had transferred to her, per the settlement, an apartment in Yongsan and a lump sum of 4,300,000,000 won, an amount his lawyers had considered generous and which she had, without informing him, donated in full within 4 months to 3 different children's foundations. He had learned this only later, from a footnote in an unrelated audit. He had not seen her again for 3 years. What she had been doing in those 3 years, he had assumed, was quiet grief in the shape of quiet work. What she had actually been doing was something else entirely, and the leather folio in her hand at Lusail Stadium was the first accounting of it he would ever see. The folio contained 61 pages. It contained account numbers in Singapore, DBS accounts ending in 4187, 4188, and 4189, held under the shell name of Meridian Pacific Holdings Private Limited, whose registered agent in Robinson Road had been paid in cash on the 23rd of each month for 4 consecutive years. It contained wire records tracing 4,300,000,000 the same figure to the 1 as her settlement, from an account in Zurich through a nominee in Labuan to a construction contract in Vladivostok that had never resulted in a building. It contained the deed to a warehouse in Jeju, owned nominally by a fisheries cooperative, whose 3 directors had all died within the past 19 months. One in a single-car accident on the coastal road at Seongsan, whose brake lines had, according to the police report, been examined but not preserved. One of a heart attack in a bathhouse in Seogwipo, whose CCTV footage had, according to the same report, malfunctioned that evening between 8:14 and 9:22 p.m. One who had walked into the ocean off Udo at low tide and had not walked back, and whose body had been recovered on the 9th day, and whose autopsy, performed at the Jeju Medical Center, had noted only in the margin a bruise on the left temple, whose origin was not established. It contained, beneath these 3, a memorandum of understanding between Daehan Holdings, LLC, and a subsidiary of the Han family's shipping conglomerate. The same memorandum Min Jae had signed on the afternoon of the 14th of December with his father's fountain pen. The memorandum, Adiezi's folio demonstrated, had a second version. The version Min Jae had signed granted him 31% of the joint venture. The version the Han family had filed with the Financial Services Commission. That same afternoon granted him 9%. The remaining 22% had been quietly assigned, through a Cayman's nominee, to a trust whose ultimate beneficiary was Han Ye-rin's uncle, a man named Han Do-jun, who had, 18 years earlier, sat as the presiding judge in a Seoul District Court case that had acquitted a young shipping executive named Choi Sang-hoon of criminal negligence in the death of a stevedore at Busan Port. The stevedore's name had been Okonkwo Chidiabere. He had been Adiezi's older brother. He had been 23. The verdict had been handed down on the 14th of October in a courtroom in Seocho-gu, in a proceeding whose transcript was later found to contain 19 redactions and whose presiding judge had received, 3 weeks after the verdict, a gift of undisclosed origin whose value was estimated at 41 million won. She had not come to Doha for him. She had come to end them. She had, the folio further showed, spent the past 4 years building a case not against Min Jae, who was, in her forensic assessment, a peripheral figure, complicit but not architect, but against the Han family and against Choi Sang-hoon, and against the network of favors and silences that had made the death of a young man at Busan Port a matter of a settled file rather than a settled question. She had done it alone at first. Then with a prosecutor in Seoul whose younger sister had died on the same shift, on the same dock, in the same year. Then with a task force whose existence was not, as of the 14th of December, publicly known. They would not need Min Jae alive, the folio's final page noted. in a footnote in Adaizi's handwriting. They needed him signed, and once signed, they needed him gone. She had come to warn him. He read the folio in the executive suite of the Signiel Doha, 38 floors above the boulevard, at 5:14 a.m. Doha time, while Ye Rin slept in the adjoining room, and the sky outside began to turn from black to the color of weak tea. He read it twice. He set the folio down on the low glass table. He walked to the window. He asked, without turning, only 2 questions. He said, "How long have you known?" She said from the armchair behind him. 4 years and 2 months, he said. "Why come now?" She said. "Because they will kill you on the 23rd of this month." "I have known the date for 6 weeks. That was the second quotable line. He said, then, the only thing he could think to say, "Hai un chidiogo," she said. And this was the third quotable line. And she said it in Korean, in the register his mother had used at the wooden gate. "I did not come back for the man who could not save our daughter. I came back because our daughter would not have wanted her father buried by the same men who buried my brother." She said it looking not at him, but at the pale square of light on the carpet where the dawn was beginning to arrive. And then, softer, in English, she added the fourth quotable line, the longest one, running past 30 words, which she had rehearsed in her mind on the flight from Geneva 2 nights before. "I am not here to love you again, Min Jae. I am not here to forgive you either. I am here because there is a part of you that our daughter still owned, and that part I have never stopped protecting, even when the rest of you was not worth the protecting. That is all. That has to be enough." He did not answer. He did not turn. The sun rose over Doha in the way suns rise in the Gulf, quickly, without ceremony, without permission. Somewhere below them, in a stadium being cleaned, workers were sweeping confetti from the previous night's match into black plastic bags. Argentina had won. It did not matter. He returned to Seoul on the 17th of December on a commercial flight, alone. He did not travel with Ye Rin. He had told her, in the suite in Doha at 6:47 a.m., that certain things had come to his attention, that he needed time, that she should return to her family. She had wept. She had asked 3 times what she had done wrong. He had told her, truthfully, that she had done nothing wrong, that the wrong belonged to her uncle and to men older than either of them, and that if she wished, in a year, to know the full shape of it, he would tell her then. She had said she did not know if she would want to know. He had said that was her right. He arrived at the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office at 9:14 a.m. on the 18th of December, unannounced, without counsel, carrying a black leather briefcase. He asked, at the front desk, for a prosecutor Jang Mi-suk, whose name Adaizi had given him. He was made to wait 41 minutes. In the 4th-floor conference room, at a long table beneath a window that faced the courtyard of Deoksugung, he opened the briefcase. He set out, one at a time, in the order Adaize had taught him, a USB drive containing the wire records for the DBS accounts, a notarized statement of his own signatures on both versions of the Han family memorandum, executed at 8:14 that morning at a notary's office in Jongno. A coroner's addendum filed in Jeju 3 days earlier, noting the reopened investigation into the death at Udo, and a single sealed envelope containing a written statement in his own hand, describing 3 meetings held in the private dining room of a restaurant in Cheongdam-dong, on dates specified to the hour at which he had been present but had not spoken. He named, in his statement, one man by a nickname only the inner circle would have known. He wrote Tae Hoona, and he wrote, beneath it, the man's legal name, Choi Sang-hoon, and the address of the restaurant, and the date of the first meeting, which had been the 14th of October, 18 years earlier. The prosecutor read the statement in silence. She read it a second time. She looked up at Min Jae, and she asked him only one question. She said, "Do you understand what you are doing?" He said, "Yes." The formal indictment was filed on the 22nd of December under Court Order 2025-Hyung-Sang-1147. Choi Sang-hoon was arrested at his home in Seongbuk-dong at 6:14 a.m. on the 23rd, the same date on which, according to a Daisy's folio, Min Jae had been scheduled to die. Han Do-jun was placed under formal investigation on the 28th. 3 subsidiaries of the Han family shipping conglomerate had their assets frozen by administrative order on the 30th. Ye Rin's father resigned from the board of the parent company on the 2nd of January. The wedding was not called off publicly. It simply did not happen. In the boardroom of Daehan Holdings on the 29th of December at 3:41 p.m., Min Jae sat at the head of a long walnut table facing the 6 senior partners of his organization. He did not raise his voice. He did not raise his voice. He said, in a register barely above a whisper, that certain files had been submitted to certain authorities. He said that certain accounts would be closing in the coming weeks. He said that certain names, and here he looked, without hurry, at the man seated third from his right, an older man named Park Hyun-woo, whom Min Jae had called Hyung-nim for 22 years, would no longer be honored in the buildings of Daehan Holdings. He said, "Hyung-nim, do you have anything to say?" Park Hyun-woo said nothing. The silence lasted 1 minute and 41 seconds. Someone in the room coughed once. That silence was the 5th quotable line. The silence of a man who had been called brother for 2 decades and who understood, in that minute and 41 seconds, that he had been named. He did not speak. He did not look up. He rose at the end of the silence, and he walked out of the boardroom, and he was arrested in the elevator lobby by 2 officers of the Seoul Metropolitan Police who had been waiting since 3:22. Min Jae did not attend the press conference. He did not attend the arraignments. He did not give interviews. He instructed his communications director to say only that Daehan Holdings would cooperate fully with all investigations and would be undertaking a comprehensive restructuring. Then he turned off his phones, both of them, and he drove himself, in the Bentley Tai Hyun had left in the garage, to Andong. He arrived at his grandmother's house on the 2nd of January at 4:12 in the afternoon. The gate was as it had been, though the wood had darkened. The persimmon tree in the courtyard had grown taller. The kitchen had been closed for 11 years since his Aomione's death, but a woman from the village came twice a month to sweep the floors and to leave a small offering on the low shelf where his Halmione's portrait hung. He sat on the wooden step of the maru for 41 minutes. He did not eat. He did not remove his overcoat. He watched the light change over the low mountains to the north, and he thought, for the first time in many years, of the pair his mother had placed on the memorial table on the wrong side, and he understood at last that she had placed it there deliberately. She had been telling him something he had not been ready to hear. She had been telling him that the shape of a table, correctly set, was not the point, that the correctness of a life was not measured in the placement of its objects, that he had spent his life arranging pairs. He began, that week, the small campaign of returns Adez had told him he would need to undertake, if he intended to be a man his daughter would have recognized. He did not phone her. He did not write. He sent, instead, on the 9th of January, a wooden crate of pears from an orchard in Yangpyeong to her office in Geneva. He sent, on the 23rd, a small jar of doenjang made in the Andong kitchen by the village woman, whose name he had, in 20 years, never asked and had now asked, and whose name was Lee Bok Nyo, and who accepted his payment of 410,000 won with a bow. He sent, on the 9th of February, a hardcover copy of Kim Hye-sun's autobiography of death in the Don Mi Choi translation, unmarked, without a note. Adaz did not reply to any of these deliveries. She acknowledged each one with a receipt code sent from an assistant's email address. That was all. That was enough. They met, finally, on the 14th of March, in the kitchen of a small apartment she kept in Yeonhui-dong that he had never known she owned. She had cooked, not doenjang jjigae. She had cooked egusi soup from a recipe her grandmother had taught her, and she had served it with pounded yam she had made herself, standing at the counter in a plain gray sweater with her sleeves rolled to the elbow. He ate slowly. She watched him eat. She said, when he had finished, "I will not be your wife again. I will not take your name. I will not live in the same city as you for more than a month in any given year. I will not raise the child we lost, because she is not ours to raise anymore, but I will let you send the pairs. And I will, when I am able, write back." That was the 6th quotable line. He said, "Yes." He said nothing else. He thought that would be the end of it. He was wrong, in the way men are always wrong about endings. On the 21st of April, a woman he had never met arrived at his hanok in Bukchon at 7:34 in the evening. She was small, in her 70s, with gray hair pinned in a low bun and a black wool coat that had been mended twice at the cuffs. She spoke Korean with an accent he could not place at first, and then recognized as the accent of a Zainichi Korean who had grown up in Osaka and had returned to the peninsula only in middle age. She introduced herself in a voice quieter than any voice that had entered that house in years, as Okonkwo Ngozi, Adaizi's mother's older sister, the Aoni her mother had spoken of only in the past tense, because they had not spoken in 31 years, since a quarrel over a will and a plot of land in Enugu that neither of them had needed. She sat in the reception room. She refused tea. She said only that she had come from Osaka that morning and that she would return that night, and that there was one thing she needed to tell him that Adayezi had not told him and would not tell him, because Adayezi believed a man should discover certain things on his own, or not at all. She said, "The prosecutor, Jang Mi-suk. Do you know who she is?" He said, "She is the prosecutor who took my statement." She said, "She is the younger sister of the stevedore. She is the sister of Chitty Bear. She was 14 when he died at Busan port. She entered law school at 18 and the prosecutor service at 26. She has waited 18 years for the file she opened 3 months ago. Adaiz did not choose her by accident." He was silent. She said, "There is one more thing." She reached into her coat. She took out a folded document, a single sheet of thick paper with the seal of the Enugu Ministry of Lands. She placed it on the low table. She said, "There is a piece of land in Enugu, 3 hectares, that belonged to Chidiabere. It has been held in trust since his death. It was to be sold this year at Adaizi's instruction, and the proceeds used to build a school in Ha-eun's name, in our niece's name, in your daughter's name. She wishes the school to bear both names. Ha-eun Chidiogo Memorial School, in Igbo, in Korean, in English. She has not asked you for anything, but I am asking you, not for money, for your name on the deed of transfer as the girl's father, so that the school may legally bear her Korean name. Nothing more." That was the 7th quotable line. He read the document. He read it slowly. He did not read past the 3rd page. He signed. This time, the not reading was the gift. Okonkwo Ngozi took the document. She folded it. She placed it back inside her coat. She stood. At the doorway of the reception room, she paused, and she looked at the photograph on the wall behind him, a photograph he had not looked at in a long time. It had been taken at Severance Hospital in the 14th floor delivery suite on the 3rd of April at 5:41 a.m., 90 minutes after Hae-Yoon Chidiogo had been born. In the photograph, Adaze held the child. Min-jae stood beside them, his hand on Adaze's shoulder. The child's eyes were closed. The child's small hand was open. The photograph was framed in plain wood, unpolished, and beneath it, in 3 inscriptions, Hangul, Igbo, English, was written the child's full name, and beneath the name, one date and nothing more. Han Haeun Chidiogo, Ha-eun Chidiogo Kang, 3.4 to 2.9. Okonkwo Ngozi bowed once, slightly, at the photograph, not at him, at the child. Then she walked out into the small courtyard and out through the wooden gate and into a taxi that took her to Incheon and then home to Osaka. And he did not see her again. He stood that evening in the reception room in front of the photograph for 41 minutes. He did not weep. He had not wept in front of anyone in 22 years, and he did not begin that night. He only stood and looked and thought of the pair on the memorial table and the wooden gate in Andong and the small hand of the child, open as if reaching for something that had not yet been offered. A boy in a stadium counts the applause and believes the loudest sound is his. A man in an empty kitchen, 3 months later, signs a document he has not read past the 3rd page and understands, for the first time, that the loudest sound is the one he will never hear, the sound of a school bell in a language his daughter never lived to speak, ringing over 3 hectares of red earth in a country he had never learned to love, because he had once been too small to love anything larger than himself. If you have stayed to the end of this chapter, I would ask you one thing, and only one. Not to like, not to share, only this. If you were Min-jae in that reception room, in front of that photograph, on the 21st of April at 8:15 in the evening, what would you have signed and what would you have refused? Tell me in the comments. Tell me the truth. And when you are ready for the next chapter, when you are ready to sit again in a room where the door has just opened and the person on the other side is not who any of us guessed, subscribe to Midnight Love Saga and tap the bell and stay close. There is another door, further down the corridor. It is already open. We are only walking toward it now, together, at the pace a story like this deserves.